English translation, 216th contact. Monday, 16th of March, 1987, 23:11 hours.
Here I am again, my friend. Be greeted, and I am also to give you very warm greetings from Sim Ya Se and deliver the very best wishes. Also, Ptah greets you very warmly, as well as Pleja, Asket, and Nera, as well as Manara and Taljda. In addition, those who are still unknown to you from the Dal universe as well as from the planet Era greet you.
Be welcomed, my friend. It is nice that you are here again. May I ask, how are all those who greeted me through you?
They are all doing well.
Nice to hear. Recently, we spoke of the coming gene manipulation by the earthly scientists. Afterwards, you told me that you would tell me something about gene doping in our next conversation.
That is of correctness. The genetic research by the earthly scientists will entail, namely, starting from the new millennium, that fighters and sportsmen, etc., will receive stimulants and, thus, stimulant drugs in the form of gene injections. This kind of doping for all kinds of purposes will become common worldwide in the coming time. And indeed, not only for humans, but also for animals, which are driven to maximum performance through gene doping. In particular, with military personnel, sports figures, and terrorist fighters, the new form of doping will cause a sensation, but also with respect to the animals, to whom gene doping injections, etc., are given in order to drive them, on the one hand, to top performances, and on the other hand, to misuse them for purposes of war and terrorism.
Then I have a question in reference to wisdom teeth, if you can give me an answer to it. Our scientists say that wisdom teeth of modern man are an unnecessary leftover from prehistoric humans' time and are absolutely unnecessary today. Is that right?
Wisdom teeth are a necessity for humans because if these are missing, then the food is no longer chewed properly and is only crushed poorly. However, especially the chewing and crushing of the food are necessary and of great significance and importance for the stomach and the intestines and for their digestive processes and, thus, for the breaking down and burning of the food. Well-chewed and crushed foods facilitate these processes quite tremendously. The front teeth, that is to say, the biting teeth or the tearing teeth, are not sufficient for the chewing process and crushing process, which is why these functions are assigned to the molars, and these include the so-called wisdom teeth. If the food is not chewed properly and is crushed poorly, then health problems will arise from this in the course of time, which can spread to and affect the stomach, as well as the intestines and even the immune system, which appears with many humans on the earth without them knowing what causes their suffering. Stomach ulcers, as well as intestinal ulcers, are fairly often a result of a lack of quality with regard to the chewing and crushing of food. Even the earthly physicians, etc., have so far gained no insights in this respect. Indeed, by them and the scientists, it is even accepted, erroneously, that wisdom teeth are a useless leftover from the early days of the earth humans, but this corresponds to a misconception beyond compare. Thus, even we, who are not only superior to the earth humans in consciousness but also in physical evolution, have wisdom teeth, of course, because these are, in fact, vitally necessary. If humans are missing these teeth, then health problems, as I said, can appear.
Thanks. In the story of Emmanuel, it is recorded that he had succumbed to sweating blood before being arrested by his captors. To my knowledge, this is called hematosis. Many humans, who are not educated in relation to this, suppose that sweating blood is not possible. But to my knowledge, this acceptance is erroneous.
That is of correctness. Hematosis, or sweating blood, is a reality.
What does the future hold in regards to rain, snow, climate warming, etc.?
I explained before that the coming time will bring all sorts of disasters in terms of the weather and the climate, that is to say, their change. In the next few decades and well into the third millennium, the Earth and its humanity will be afflicted by many natural disasters. Great earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and devastating thunderstorms, snowstorms, hurricanes, and violent cyclones will be rife, whereby tremendous amounts of water and snow will fall down from the clouds upon the earth, causing enormous floods and snow catastrophes in the form of enormous avalanches, etc. The origin for this will be in global warming, which will partially be attributed to natural causes, but mostly to the environmental pollution. Environmental degradation and climate influence of the Earth humans, as this has already been the case for many years. The Earth's climate is changing, and as a result, everything leads to greater evaporation of the seas, streams, rivers, and lakes, for which the greenhouse gas, CO2, is also to blame, which the human beings release into the atmosphere. Through this, many other things also change in the nature of the Earth, as well as in the planet itself, such as the circulation and the number and intensity of the winds, which are becoming increasingly stronger and more powerful, and which grow into severe hurricanes, etc. The two main factors, evaporation and stronger storm-related winds, make it that during the periods from spring to autumn, massive rainstorms break out over the Earth, and enormous masses of water rain down and flood everything, while in the cold winter season, also vast amounts of moisture are driven over the areas of the mainland, forming into snow crystals in the cold air and leading to very unusually heavy and extreme snowfalls, which often continue for days. This means, however, that the danger of avalanches will also very greatly increase in the mountains, especially in Europe, whereby the greatest destruction will be caused, and many human lives will have to be lamented through terrible deaths when increasingly more, larger, more dangerous, and more destructive avalanches appear.
And what causes avalanches, or what is the reason for an avalanche formation?
Basically, through winds, sunshine, and cold fronts, various snow layers form, which are only loosely stacked on top of each other. So, for example, underneath is a crusted, frozen layer, and above that is a loose and quite airy layer, or simply loose, powdery snow. Such structures are enough. Then, for an avalanche to occur, when, through a gust of wind, through a snowdrift breaking off, through a slight shock of earthly origin, a small movement between the different covers of snow arises. In addition, avalanches are released by all kinds of animals, as well as by irresponsible people who go on such dangerous snow cliffs, on foot or on skis or sleds, etc., whereby the slightest shocks are enough to trigger a catastrophe. Depending on the critical structure of the various resulting snow layers, a thrown snowball or object may already be enough for the release of an avalanche. In fact, often just the slightest shocks are sufficient.
And what are the most dangerous avalanches?
Undoubtedly the snow powder avalanches. This is a fact that, unfortunately, is not recognized by many human beings and leads to fatal accidents.
Do all climate changes actually have no consequences for the planet itself? Do you know something about this?
Of course, the planet itself is also affected in various forms, but to enumerate all of these in detail would take too long. However, it should be said that all resulting changes in the climate, as well as the greenhouse gas and the inner Earth resource exploitation by the Earth humans, will lead, in the course of time, to a change in the Earth's rotation. At first, this will only be imperceptible, and in 100 years, it will only amount to about 1/6 of a second, but this will steadily increase in subsequent periods and centuries as well as millennia.
And this through the fault of the Earth humans? Or will there also be natural planetary and cosmic factors in play?
Your presumption is right. On the one hand, the Earth humans will be very much to blame for these coming changes. But on the other hand, completely natural, planetary, and cosmic processes will also play a role that is not to be underestimated.
With that, you probably mean the way of all ephemeral, into which everything, including the Earth, is arranged?
That is the sense of my words, yes.
May I now ask how old your mother and your father are?
That is no secret. My mother is 481 and my father is 483 years old.
Do you know of even other universes than the Dal universe and ours? With this, I do not just mean other dimensions or other space-time configurations in our Dern universe, but actually other universes, so foreign ones that do not belong to our two twin universes.
Actually, we have already concerned ourselves scientifically with foreign universes for a long time, but so far we have not been able to gain any concrete insights that would enable us to penetrate into such universes. We have knowledge and proof of the existence of foreign universes, but it is still impossible for us to break them open. Therefore, we can presently only visit the Dern's sister universe, that is to say, the Dern's twin universe, and thus the Dal universe. However, our scientists as well as Asket's people and their highly developed allies are working very hard on solving the problem at hand. A success is likely to be expected, however, in at least 15 years.
That would be shortly after the turn of the millennium. If I remember this in the new millennium, then I will ask you or another one of you about how the relevant research stands.
That will remain open for you.
Somehow, I will surely remember it, even though my memory has suffered greatly since my health collapse.
I also think that this will be the case. Your memory surely will not let you down, as you tend to say.
Simya-se once explained to me, in response to one of my questions, that antimatter is real, and that this was already discovered by your ancestors more than 50,000 years ago, and has been used by you since that time as beamship propulsion. Since then, have you researched and developed new techniques for this?
Of course, negative matter, as we call antimatter, has already been used by us for 50 millennia for all sorts of purposes. And of course, also, much other research was connected with it, and still is. Therefore, new insights will also constantly be won, and will create new ones, with which negative matter is brought to application or is used.
Understood. But tell me, are you also familiar with meteoropathy? Since my accident in Iskenderun in Turkey on the 4th of August, 1964, as well as since my severe health collapse on the 4th of November, 1982, I suffer from meteoropathy at the center, particularly in reference to my lost arm, with which I address excessive phantom pains, which can sometimes drive me up the wall and make me half insane.
Physical meteoropathy is caused by planetary as well as solar-conditioned fluctuations or variations that affect humans and animals as well as plants, and indeed in all genera and species, when these have any organic or physical injuries. These include scarring on the bones as well as on the skin, flesh, muscles, veins, and organs. With us, however, this meteoropathy no longer appears among humans because with all resulting injuries, as well as with illnesses, if such would exceptionally occur once, which is virtually impossible. However, healing measures and healing processes are carried out and are brought to application, which completely repair all injuries to bones, flesh, skin, and organs down to the last detail, consequently no scarring or other factors of injury, and, thus, no after-effects remain that could cause meteoropathy.
Then I have a question about scents and odors. Where, actually, do humans perceive scents and odors in truth? It cannot just be the olfactory organ, right? And what exactly is to be thought of the Bach flower theory?
Scents and odors are not just perceived through the olfactory organ, that is to say the nose, but also through the skin. In addition, the palate and the tongue play a certain role, as this is also the case in terms of taste. The actual center of the perception of scents, perception of odors, and perception of taste, however, is the limbic system, in which all relevant perceptions concentrate and are processed. Through this processing of scents and odors, as well as the associations of taste, thoughts and feelings arising from this are likewise triggered, as well as emotions, certain behaviors, body reactions, actions, organ reactions, skin reactions, and memories. Scents, odors, and tastes also affect the immune system, from which it follows that they may also be health-promoting or injurious to health, namely depending on their type and intensity. Of course, this is also valid for the psyche and for the consciousness. Concerning Bach flower therapy, the same is valid, like with the application of other similar or parallel therapies or other utilizations of scents and odors. This also applies to flavorings. All these substances should not and may not be handled thoughtlessly and carelessly. But unfortunately, this often is not considered by the earth human because they always choose to exaggerate these things, which often causes more harm than good. Only minor or no successes at all are achieved. This is also so in reference to Bach flower therapy, which truthfully does not reach the form of application that would basically correspond to what is right. For example, when psychological interests are concerned, Bach flower therapy, as a rule, does not work at all or only partially, and indeed even with months of application. So the rule is that solely through the mental and emotional adjustment of the person during these months are psychological troubles removed, which is then erroneously attributed to the Bach flower therapy, which is brought to application in a far too low concentration. In and of itself, Bach flower therapy is just as good in its value as any other aromatherapy. Scent therapy and taste therapy, but all these therapies become useless or injurious to health if misused, which can be the case both through an underdosage but also through an excessive dosage. Unfortunately, a great deal of mischief, untruth, fraud, and charlatanry is practiced in many respects in this field through profiteering and greed, as well as through ignorance on the part of the earth human. In terms of this, and especially with respect to the general lack of understanding in these areas, the applications of scents, odors, and tastes require extreme caution. In this regard, authoritative research and insights of a scientific nature are not yet given on the earth with the humans in the form that they could be referred to as actual results and knowledge. Everything is, so to speak, still in its baby shoes, as you tend to say. Real research results, as well as real insights of a scientific nature in this regard, should first be made toward the end of this or at the beginning of the new millennium. Only after that will everything slowly take a turn for the better in regards to the utilization of scents and odors as well as flavorings.
We on the Earth have consulates or embassies in all countries. These have the task of representing citizens who belong to their home countries in foreign countries, and also of performing other duties that result with the host country and the home country. whereby also purely political matters must be settled by these institutions. And in particular, the transmission of messages also falls to the embassies. But now, here in the world, it is the case, as you once told me, that in the future, more and more of these consulates and embassies will be threatened, invaded, occupied, and perhaps even blown up into the air by terrorists, lunatics and assassins, etc. Of course, under certain circumstances, this will also bring a lot of trouble for the people who reside in the environment, perhaps even ruin and death. Here, I ask myself, how is this with you? For you certainly also have similar institutions, through which home country citizens are represented, and through which messages, etc. are transmitted, right? Also, such enterprises are probably necessary in regard to contact with your Federation and the governments, as well as with those who do not belong to your alliance.
That is quite correct. We also have such institutions, of course, but on our own planets, they are not related to the same political framework as the one you know on Earth. Purely planetary institutions in relation to this only have the duties of care, order, and administration, but no political aspects, etc., for our worlds are guided by the spirit leadership of a central form, whereby the institutions mentioned, then, are the actual executive bodies. Of course, the same are also responsible in certain cases, which are specified very much together with the central spirit leadership, for particular aspects concerning the governments of planets of our Federation, as well as with governments of worlds that are foreign to the Federation. But overall, they are only representatives who exercise their duties on behalf of the central spirit leadership, who, in turn, represents the people's will, which is fathomed in each case by planet-wide votes. Such votes, for which you say elections among yourselves, take place in accordance with proposals, etc. from the people, but also in accordance with the ideas and proposals of the central spirit leadership, or with regard to advice from the High Council. In the past, when separation and discord still prevailed among our peoples, institutions of the aforementioned kind also existed, of course, whereby these were likewise exposed to attacks by discontented ones, etc., as this will also be the case on the Earth in the coming time in different countries, which is why the institution's own alert forces and protective forces will no longer be sufficient and will be reinforced over time by the police and army. Thus, our very distant ancestors had the same problems with discontented ones, with fanatics, terrorists, and assassins, with regard to attacks and destruction, etc., on the aforementioned institutions, whereby also racial hatred, hatred of foreigners, and other degenerate extremism played important roles. In order to protect the institutions, and indeed also a wide variety of others that had official forms of government, a decision was put into effect, which stipulated that all governmental buildings and administrative buildings, etc., be banned from all residential areas and be transferred to uninhabited areas that were exclusively valid for the purpose of the institutions, and that, of course, also found appropriate formations with water features, trees, and all sorts of bushes, flowers, and other plants. Far outside of these institutional systems, so that the residents did not feel trapped and imprisoned, everything was fenced in and was equipped with security equipment, which made it absolutely impossible for an undetected penetration by water, land, or air, as well as for a penetration of an underground kind. In this connection, there were also guards who closely monitored every person and every vehicle or aircraft when allowed entry, driving, or flying into the secured area. Through this, unauthorized ones were prevented from entering the premises and causing harm, as well as disaster and destruction and endangering human lives.
It is always said that sea salt should be much healthier than regular table salt. Probably for this reason, namely that it is supposed to be healthier, it is also sold at much higher prices than normal salt. Moreover, the prices are set so high that they are often 40 or 50 times higher, or even more, than what traditional table salt costs.
That is undoubtedly an evil scam, because sea salt does not contain any better or higher values than actual table salt. Both salts correspond to the same values. Therefore, when it is maintained that sea salt contains better values or is healthier than the so-called normal salt, this corresponds to a lie, if not fraud, since very high prices are demanded for it, and thus, dishonest business practices are pursued with this.
You once explained to me, as Simyase and Ptah have also done this, that Nazi doctors as well as Nazi surgeons, in collaboration with Nazi psychologists and Nazi psychiatrists, were involved in the sterilization by force of thousands of women of the Jewish faith, as well as members of the Sinti and Roma, and also criminals and those hindered in consciousness. During World War II, you also said that the same activities were also quite common in Switzerland, as well as in Sweden and France, in America, and in the Soviet Union. In Sweden alone, so you said, more than 60,000 women were maltreated in this inhumane and legally untenable form.
That is of correctness. But the whole thing still has no end, for in different countries, this inhumane practice is still secretly operated, and indeed, even in Switzerland, in France, the Soviet Union, and in America. But also in Sweden, this doing is still common in secret. Of course, this fact is vehemently denied in all countries, and this evil is practiced under the strictest secrecy. As we know, Switzerland already practiced this inhumane unworthiness at the end of the 19th century, while Sweden and France first began with this practice in the 20s of the 20th century, which is also true of the Soviet Union as well as America. The justifications for these atrocities ranged from preventing or eradicating unworthy life up to the need for relevant research, in order to gain medical insights, etc., from which new medicines and methods of health treatment could allegedly be investigated and produced. But overall, this action corresponded and corresponds to an inhumane, criminal act beyond compare. There is never an excuse for this.
I think so too. But when I keep in mind how these women suffered in their thoughts and feelings and in their psyches, as well as in their consciousnesses, and how they must continue to suffer, then I blow my top off. Yet it seems quite absurd to me if I overexert myself over this, so it's probably better that I let time run its course and wait until sooner or later. Everything comes to the public's attention, and through this, these crimes against women will be combated and come to an end. I still think it's important to say, which you have mentioned, that particularly in Switzerland, the authorities, such as the poor offices and guardianship authorities, in collaboration with the doctors of psychiatry and surgery, were the criminal and felonious gang that was responsible for these horrible atrocities, along with certain aid agencies that tore families apart and destroyed them, such as the Pro Juventute, about which I also know how to sing a bad song. And indeed, not just with respect to the wanderers, that is to say the Yenish, through whom a tremendous amount of suffering was caused by this organization. And since I'm already talking about the aid agencies, then I would also like to address you on the international aid agencies as well as on the children's aid agencies and on the United Nations, that is to say the UN, regarding many of these relief agencies or organizations. I have had very bad experiences in different countries, but I've also heard incredible complaints from children, adolescents, and young as well as older women, who told me their concerns and problems. So for example, when I was in Marauli in New Delhi in India, each week I picked up a small handcart full of instant milk at a European and American aid agency, in order then to feed it to the dogs in our animal station. For this milk, donated by the people of the United States, we paid $5 to $10 in each case. On the other hand, I experienced, like in a sect church, various food that was donated in such a way, which was sold to the believers. And it was such that those who received the most were the ones who had donated most diligently to the collections. But that is not all, because what I saw myself and what children, adolescents, and women also complained to me was that they often only received donated food or other relief supplies if they fulfilled the sexual desires of the members or helpers of the aid agencies, or when they let themselves be sexually abused and thus raped without resistance. This was likewise explained to me by children, adolescents, and younger as well as older women, who, as refugees, were dependent on food or any other relief supplies. Several of those who complained to me of their suffering were pregnant or had given birth to children through these criminal machinations of the helpers of aid agencies.
The unpleasant events relating to this, as well as your experiences from your childhood, are well known to me. It really is a shame how these so-called aid agencies have behaved in earlier times and what power they have exercised, to which also the authorities, psychiatrists, doctors, surgeons, poor care and guardianship offices have stooped. But likewise to be described as a shame and as criminally inhumane are also the events mentioned by you and the conduct of the members and helpers of the aid agencies. This also applies to the relevant criminal machinations of the fallible ones who belong to the UN. But unfortunately, it is also the case that these practices still continue to be operated by the irresponsible ones, and therefore there is still no end in sight in this regard. Still, nothing about this has become public. Therefore, everything will continue for quite some time. And when the time comes when everything reaches the public's attention, it will be such, as it is always the case when any atrocities and crimes are uncovered, that the responsible persons will act, often against better knowledge, as though they did not have the slightest idea of everything, and thus will be totally shocked. This can be expected with a clear conscience. In reference to the remark, because we know the circumstances and machinations of the fallible ones in the aforementioned form very well through our own observations. Therefore, I can also confirm your statements.
I can remember everything very well, and it still gives me pain today when I think of the pains and sufferings of all of those children, adolescents, and women who complain to me of their powerlessness. The fact that I beat the crap out of two such scoundrels, when I caught them in a rape, still gives me satisfaction to this day. But something else. A doctor urged me to ask you if you could provide information about whether susceptibility to kidney stones is inheritable. In regards to these matters, quite insufficient insights still prevail among the earthly doctors, etc. Therefore, it would really be of importance if you could provide some enlightenment. You should also be certain of the thanks of the doctor.
That is actually the case, yes. Susceptibility to kidney stones can be inheritable through a gene-contingent metabolic defect.
And what specific substances form kidney stones, or where do they come from?
Calcium oxalate stones, as kidney stones are caused by several things, such as by foods. These include, among other things, vegetables such as beets, asparagus, rhubarb, nuts, and beetroots, garden beets, red beets, etc. However, other products are also to be mentioned, such as cocoa and cocoa products. Also, poor nutrition, deformities of the kidneys, as well as urinary obstruction and urinary tract infections, can be causes for kidney stones. However, foods that contain a lot of oxalate are particularly the ones that form kidney stones. What is also significant in this regard is sugar, which is why sugar-rich foods and beverages, etc., should not be enjoyed in excess but only in moderation and with a limit. Added to this is the liquid water, which plays a very important role, so that the toxins and thus also the excess oxalate are washed from the body. Therefore, it is essential that sufficient liquid is always drunk, but always only within the limits of what a person needs. And since no one is the same as another in this relation, one normally requires 2 to 3 liters of water per day, while another must only drink 2 or 3 deciliters, in order to ensure the right balance of fluid for his body. With exertions or heat, this can change, of course, like also, for example, through illness and thus also through fever. Consequently, a greater need for fluid to be supplied can then develop. For your part, if I still want to come to speak on that, you are one of those people who need very little fluid, and sometimes less than a deciliter per day is enough if your body absolutely requires any liquid at all. This is something that many misinformed people, even doctors, cannot understand or do not want to understand, because it simply goes over their heads. The reason for the low fluid needs of such people, as you are one of these, is to be found in the fact that there is a very high metabolism and, therefore, also a very good digestion and utilization, as well as burning and conversion of the nutrients. Consequently, very few toxins are incurred, which do not burden the organism, and which only sporadically have to be flushed out of the body again with very little liquid. This is also true, of course, for the food wastes that form in the intestines through the burning of nutrients, which are then excreted, also sporadically, as feces. What is still to be mentioned further with respect to the prevention or lower susceptibility to kidney stones in those who only drink small amounts of liquid is that they also have little food in their diet that is high in oxalates.
Then I now have a question about the migraine, which afflicts so many Earth humans. Can you tell me what triggering factors stand behind this?
A migraine is triggered by stressful situations, that is, by stress that is caused physically, in consciousness, or psychologically. Such stressful situations can occur periodically, chronically, or sporadically, namely depending on how the person behaves in reference to the forms mentioned, so in consciousness, physically, or psychologically. Especially in psychological and consciousness-related terms, the resulting thoughts and feelings are of the utmost importance, since these determine the state of the psyche as well as the state of the consciousness. Another important factor is food that is also responsible for triggering a migraine. And to be sure, in the form when certain foods are not tolerated by a person, as this is often the case, for example with milk or milk products. Intolerable foods release physical, stressful situations that can be controlled and processed by people, susceptible to migraines just as little as also the psychological and consciousness-related stress factors that are produced. There may also be a predisposition to a migraine due to any health problems or a gene-contingent inheritance, whereby the aforementioned stressful situations are caused. It is also possible that organic or physical injuries, including all kinds of scarring, etc., can cause the release of a migraine, as well as allergies and certain diseases, by what means stressful situations can likewise be triggered. And as stated, those suffering from migraines are not able to control, process, or overcome the stress appearing in various forms, which then even leads to suffering and barely tolerable pains. Thus, all factors that lead to any stress should already be turned off in advance, of course, as far as possible. This has reference to work, to dealing with others and everyday life situations, as well as to food, with which all that is incompatible should be avoided. Influences for the occurrence of a migraine are also electromagnetic radiations that emanate from machines and electric cables, as well as from electric motors and from electrical appliances. In addition, a strong earth radiation can also be decisive for a migraine in certain cases, as well as static electricity that accumulates in certain materials of human achievements, and that comes into direct contact with those who are susceptible to migraines. It is also to be said that people who are prone to migraines can also trigger these through medicines that are incompatible for them, herbs, scents, and odors, and also through drinks that are harmful to them, as well as through personal care products like soap, balm, lotion, shampoo, and cream, etc. Also, a variety of oils, greases, and liquids, as well as chemicals, can be triggers for migraines if they come in contact with the skin or with the mucous membranes or the internal organs.
That is tremendous. Everything that plays a role there. Our medical science still knows nothing, or only very little about that. And it will surely still take some time before it gets behind all these facts. May this be soon, because for those who are befallen to migraines, their condition is a hell.
That is of correctness, but unfortunately, it will still take many years before the earthly scientists recognize the decisive, important things through their research efforts and then find the necessary means and ways to be able, then, to remove the migraine evil at last.
And of course, those who are befallen to migraines, then, must also contribute their part to this, through their mental work and through the feelings arising from this. I mean in terms of healing, because if I understood correctly, then this cooperation is indeed necessary.
This cooperation is, in fact, necessary because a lot depends on the thoughts and feelings and, thus, on the psychological state, at least still for now, since still no medicines are found or still no genetic engineering is created, by which all factors of migraine production could be eliminated permanently. Unfortunately, the way and the necessary remedies still have not been found in the earthly medicine, and it will still take some time before this happens.
Then once again, I have a question regarding the pre-Columbian Nazca Indian culture. That is to say, the Nazca Indians, who resided in the valleys and areas of Nazca, Ica, and Pisco, and who made gigantic geoglyphs in the desert plain, which have remained up to this day. I asked about these once before, and I was told that these pictures concern astrology gardens. But in addition to this, I mean to this explanation, it was then later noted that the real purpose of this huge layout of geoglyphs did not just serve for astrology. But then, unfortunately, no further explanation was given to this because I did not continue to ask about it. I would like to do that now with this. What now is the actual purpose of these giant pictures?
The Nazca geoglyphs, as you call them, at the time of the Nazca culture, formed a large ritual site in their entirety. Therefore, one can speak of a ritual garden, of an astrology ritual garden, or of a ritual area, or rather a ritual landscape. The rituals carried out there corresponded to faith-related cultic actions, and thus religious actions. The types of rituals served several purposes, but fertility rituals were the most common forms that were carried out at these cult sites or ritual sites. However, just like the Stonehenge structures, that is to say the megaliths, located to the north of Salisbury, Wiltshire in southern England, the Nazca layouts also served as general meeting places as well as judgment sites and sites of execution.
So all of the various allegations are rubbish, such as the ones that the geoglyphs would mark or indicate underground rivers, or that these are prehistoric airfields of or for extraterrestrials. As this, along with other things, is fantasized by Erich von Daniken. These geoglyphs in the desert plains of southern Peru show enormous geometric figures, animals, plants, and humans, which are only recognizable in their entire forms from a certain height. For this reason, one might get the idea that the pictures could have somehow been made by specific instructions from a certain height.
That is of correctness. The actual meaning of the Nazca geoglyphs is based in the explanations that I gave you. All other explanation attempts by any ignorant ones, profiteers or people given to fantasies or imaginations, correspond to wild fantasies, confused assertions, or deliberate deceptions. What you say in regards to the fact that the geoglyphs are only recognizable in their full forms from a certain height, as this is the case with respect to other similar pictures in other parts of the world, I must say that this is actually so. However, the production of the pictures is not actually based on the fact that from a certain height, instructions would have been given for it. In truth, all measurements, etc., were made in an extremely accurate manner on the ground alone, even though this may seem unbelievable to today's Earth humans, because they cannot make any such images themselves. Unfortunately, the human beings of the Earth always tend to search for impossible explanations for things that they do not know and do not understand. And wherever or for whatever they find no explanations, then it must be aliens, ghosts, or demons. And even when that is no longer possible, then it is simply taken to be a miracle, even though there are no miracles within the entire creational realm, and thus also in the entire universe and in all dimensions. In fact, everything that is seen can be explained. It is just that the necessary insights and knowledge are also necessary for this, and precisely in these, the Earth humans are still lacking in very many respects. Their cognition and understanding, as well as their knowledge and their wisdom, still are not so comprehensive that they could understand and explain all things and concerns, etc., which is why, in their ignorance, they call everything that is still unexplainable to them miracles, or search for solutions and explanations that fall into the realms of fantasy and error. Although the Earth person only learns slowly, in time, they will find the solutions to the things that are still unknown and mysterious to them.
You speak a true word, but in this respect, only few human beings want to let themselves be taught because the human beings are stubborn and do not want to let go of their old, inoculated pattern and, thus, also not their erroneous thinking, but rather continue to live by faith in the old, traditional muddling and in religious acceptances, letting themselves be deceived by religions and sects, and letting themselves go astray.
With that, you unfortunately express a truth that is extremely regrettable.
I know that, which is why I also said it. But now, I would like to ask you, how important, actually, is light for humans, as well as for animals? Concerning plants, it is well known that these do not grow and cannot exist without light, with certain exceptions, like when these grow in the dark. But with that, the question becomes loud and clear. Why can these do without light? Can you give me a satisfactory answer to this? This question does not just interest me, but also others, which means that I was asked about it. Also, a student is interested in this, as a result of her biology lessons.
Of course, I can give you information about that. Plants that grow without light underground, the ones of which you speak, always grow towards the light. And light is also present. In a swinging wave-based form, in the dark, even though the human being, with all their senses or by technical apparatuses, cannot ascertain this, such as by light-sensing devices. The swinging waves of light do not simply end at the surface of an object. On the rock stratum and rocks, as well as on the Earth's surface, or at a dark cloud in space, etc. Rather, these still penetrate very deeply into matter. This means that also in the subsoil of the Earth, certain plants can prosper because they grow toward the light-swinging waves that are invisible to humans and, that penetrate through the soil and which are sufficient for the prosperity of the plants to be assured. This is a fact that will still remain a secret to the earthly scientists of biology for a long time. Therefore, they still must first investigate and fathom everything. Without these light-swinging waves that penetrate very deeply into the earth, the underground plants, as we call them, could not prosper and could not exist. However, where the light-swinging waves are no longer able to penetrate, also no plants can grow anymore. It is also important to note that the deeply penetrating light-swinging waves only exhibit partial rays of actual light, and therefore, a different form than the actual light-swinging waves. Moreover, such forms of light are already known to the earthly scientists. It is just that these do not concern the ones that penetrate into certain depths of matter. And from the same light-swinging waves, from which the underground plants or plants of the dark draw their vitality, also the underground animals or animals of the dark benefit, including the fish of the dark and deep-sea animals of every genus and species. Also, animals and humans need a great amount of light, including the nighttime animals or the nocturnal animals. Also the so-called night owls, that is to say nocturnal human beings, need light, and indeed, without exception, even if life behavioral patterns and all physical and organic factors adapt themselves and new day and night behavioral patterns come about, as this applies, for example, to the Inuit, that is to say, the Eskimos. These have a completely different life rhythm than all those people who are arranged into the day and night rhythm throughout the whole year, which is not the case with the Inuit, as you know, because in the area of the high north, with the Eskimos, different day and night conditions prevail than what are given in the rest of the world. If the human being changes, apart from the accustomed change with the Inuit, their daily rhythm and, with this, also their life rhythm, such as through irregular working hours, which you call shift work, then health problems and even serious health damage can appear, which can result, on the one hand, through the irregularity of the lifestyle and, on the other hand, through the changed lighting conditions and, thus, through unsuitable, artificial light. Stomach and intestinal troubles as well as serious stomach and intestinal diseases can be the result, as well as bad depressions and aggressiveness, and also dizziness, nausea, blurred vision, and a general functional impairment of the immune system. If a person, and this is also true for animals, is lacking the absolutely essential light, then very negative disturbances and changes also occur in the hormonal balance, whereby, in turn, the immune system is strongly impaired in its strength and function. Lack of light also leads very quickly to thought interferences, emotional disturbances, and concentration problems through which, in a short time, also disturbances of the psyche appear, which in turn cause psychosomatic effects in the body and organs. At the same time, this concerns suffering with pain symptoms, etc., that cannot be diagnosed by the earthly doctors, because often they are not yet advanced far enough in the area of medicine.
Thanks for your detailed explanations. Do you actually still have enough time to answer even more questions for me? For I still have a few things in stock. If your time should be tight for you, then everything can, indeed, be moved to our next conversation.
At the moment, there are not any urgent duties that I would have to settle quickly. Thus, I still have a while to satisfy your questions with explanatory answers. So let's hear what questions you still have. But remember that even I am not all-knowing, and thus I can only give you information with respect to my general knowledge and my learned activities and scientific fields.
You speak so sententiously. It could be directly from me if I tried to express myself nobly.
I also learn a lot from you, and especially from your written works, which you have already composed in excellent German since your early youth and childhood, which itself makes a great impression with our linguists.
And still this. You make me embarrassed.
That does not lie in my sense.
Concerning Mars, I have another question. Even though the entire planet is practically a wild, dry landscape, there is, nevertheless, a rather thick and large layer of ice on the South Pole, which could be compared to the layers of ice of our Arctic and Antarctic. Of course, the conditions are not right for this. Nevertheless, this South Pole layer of ice is present, as I could see during the flight around Mars when, on the one hand, Sim-Ya-Se first took me there in her beam ship, as we flew to the great spacer of her father Ptah, and also after that, as Ptah circled around Mars again on the return flight to the Earth, in order to show me even other things, as this was also the case with all other SOL planets and several of their moons, which I wanted to see. Then, the journey still took us to the nearer and further surroundings of the Sun, where I saw several other remarkable things, as well as on the North Pole of the Earth, which are still unknown to our earthly scientists of astronomy, and which are likely to give them some surprise and attract attention, even with the earthly population, when one or another is discovered. For example, among other things, I am referring to the fact that far behind the Sun, there orbits even another planet, but this remains hidden from the Earth, always located behind the star, for it has a solar orbit with such a speed that it can never become visible from the Earth. And moreover, it already drifts out of the Sol system, and thus slowly removes itself from the system. Moreover, Ta showed me that there is also a sun ring system, as this is also the case for several of the planets in a different form. At the same time, I also saw that in this ring system, as it was called by Ptah, a certain number of satellites also romped around. But everything was not comparable to Saturn's ring system, whose actual moons did not circulate in the ring system itself, as this is the case for the satellites of the Sun's ring system. Now the question, am I now allowed to talk about this, contrary to what Ptah told me in 1975, that I must maintain silence over these things? I was also allowed to release information about other things, at least for the group members. But how is it now today? Since then, 12 years have lapsed in the country, during which time a lot has changed, and my contacts have also become well known around the world. Therefore, probably no one would be surprised anymore if I would now release some information relating to the aforementioned. Even if I am designated as a spinner again, it will not cause harm anymore. I think that I no longer get so upset or angry, and I certainly also know how to prevent this. I have already been branded as a spinner and fantasist, and my enemies cannot even do more than practice stupid talk and dumb criticism and slander me, etc., who still will not be able to remain silent even now, for certain humans think nothing of rational thinking or of propriety and tolerance. Some of the very friendly fellows are simply inconvincible because they are megalomaniacal and arrogant.
What you said is of correctness. However, a danger will continue to exist, namely that those certain elements will seek and continue to seek after your life if you talk about the aforementioned facts officially, which these people will not like. Thus, you must exercise extreme caution in every respect.
That will be the least of my concerns. I can take care of myself quite well, and if it is necessary, I can also defend myself. I am actually not as defenseless as some people think I am. In so many respects, I have my defense capabilities, as you should actually know.
That is well known to me, but maybe you are too carefree. But if you promise that you will exercise sufficient caution and attention in reference to the protection of your life, then I may certainly give you permission to release some more information, at least within the framework that you have mentioned. And what I still want to say, one could also say to your comment about the ring system of the Sun that it is a veil ring, or more precisely, a veil ring system, which consists of fine and very fine particles and also small and large chunks of various sizes, or even satellites, as you call them.
Thanks. There is still so much that could be told of my great journey, but I think that everything would ultimately become too much.
You certainly are not wrong about that, because everything really would be too much if you wanted to tell or write down all of your observations and experiences of your 5-day-long journey.
That is exactly what I mean.
Then we are indeed of the same opinion.
So I said,
So what does your next question relate to? As well as I know you, you are not yet at the end of all that you want to know.
what seasons exist on Era?
The same as the ones on your home planet, the Earth.
So spring, summer, autumn, and winter?
That is of correctness.
And the duration of the individual seasons, these also approximately coincide with ours?
Even that is of correctness. Nevertheless, Simyase as well as Ptah and I already explained to you before that our home world is very Earth-like, and thus comparable with the Earth as far as possible.
I know. I just wanted to reassure myself again because someone asked me about it.
Oh, I understand. Actually, I should have remembered, since you often do this because you do not want to transmit any false information. That is indeed well known to me.
Thanks for your understanding.
The thanks are mine, for I am honored that you asked me, whereby you do not transmit any false information.
And for my part, I am honored that you answer my questions, which is not to be regarded simply as a matter of course.
Officially, it is unfortunately not permitted, not just with regard to my person but for all of us, to answer some of your questions. Only when the answers and explanations regarding sensitive issues are determined for you alone can I deal with them and give you exhaustive information.
Of course. I also do not want to push you into something and thereby lead you into the devil's kitchen. But what you can officially answer for me is certainly the question that you recently meant with it, when you said that the future of antibiotics looks gloomy.
That is of correctness. I can respond to that openly. My allusion referred to the fact that the earthly physicians will be forced to investigate new medicines in terms of antibiotics. This will find its reasons in the fact that more and more the Earth humans will senselessly take antibiotics, and to be sure, ones that are irresponsibly prescribed by the doctors, for even the most minor of illnesses. But on the other hand, the human being will also be tormented more and more by antibiotic injections in all sorts of meats and other food products, causing a wide variety of bacterial strains to become resistant against antibiotics. But this will mean that the possibilities for treating diseases and infections of various types will become more and more problematic, and, in the end, no effective medicines will be available anymore. This will happen, on the one hand, through the irresponsibility of many doctors, and, on the other hand, through the fault of those who, due to their greed for profit, allow foods of all kinds to be filled with antibiotics, as this has already been the case for quite some time in all industrialized countries, in which animals are bred for slaughter and foods of all kinds are produced in order to be placed on the consumer market and sold to the consumers. These, then, are the ones who become impaired in their immune systems by the antibiotic-impregnated food and who become infected with bacterial strains, against which there are no longer possibilities for defense. In particular, multi-resistant germs or bacteria will emerge more and more in hospitals, against which there will be almost no possibilities for defense anymore, or else none at all. Particularly in this regard, the bacterium Staphylococcus aureus will excel in an extremely dangerous form as an especially multi-resistant hospital germ, which is designated by the short name of Mrs. as well as on the bare skin, and it is extremely contagious and thus very easily transferable and capturable. The bacterium first becomes really dangerous, however, when it arrives into the body in some way, such as via external or internal wounds, but there are still other possibilities, such as through infusions, etc., but this will still remain hidden to the physicians for a long time. As I said, too many antibiotics are swallowed by the earth humans, through which the various bacterial strains become more and more resistant against all types of antibiotics. With this, a multi-resistance will appear over time, which will result then only as a natural effect of the cause of antibiotic abuse. As I said, more and more antibiotics will be irresponsibly given to the patients by the doctors. And on the other hand, the earth humans will eat more and more antibiotic-contaminated meats of all kinds, and to be sure, meats of mammals of all kinds, and also of fish and fowls. This will cause bacterial strains of every kind to become more and more resistant in humans. As I already explained, consequently, in the end, any medically prescribed antibiotics will no longer be able to cause any healing or any relief from suffering. Yet through this, more and more deaths will appear, just due to the failure of medicines or due to a lack of suitable and effective medicines. From these facts, there will already be talk very soon of an end of the antibiotic age among the earth humans. More and more, every kind of antibiotic has already been criminally and feloniously administered to animals, fish, and fowls in large quantities during the making of meat, or rather the production of meat. On the one hand, in order to make these immune to diseases and, on the other hand, to achieve a fast growth and also a rapid weight gain. But in the future, this will cause all sorts of evils for the earth humans, of which the physicians and doctors still have no idea up to now, which will, therefore, also have very unfavorable and extremely dangerous consequences in the future. Because the wrong and excessive use of antibiotics in human medicine and veterinary medicine, as well as in the feeding of animals, fish and fowl, etc., is in no wise harmless. The antibiotic residues in the foods of all kinds, about which the earth human usually knows nothing, trigger a growing spread of resistance from the various strains of bacteria, which can then no longer be fought, or else only with difficulty. Consequently, everything in the relevant form leads to hopeless medical treatments and to a farce that will demand more and more deaths. Through this, a catastrophe becomes predetermined and inevitable if reason does not triumph and the misuse of antibiotics is not strictly forbidden and controlled, and if new medicines are not found in the foreseeable time that can break through the resistance of the dangerous germs that cause extremely dangerous infections, such as wound infections and blood poisoning, but also many other illnesses, such as pneumonia and other ills, whereby the scientists and physicians will often stand before riddles when they have to make diagnoses and have to find out methods of treatment. And once again, it would be said that in the course of time, antibiotic residues produce extremely dangerous effects in the food, and that the health of the consumers is risked and harmed in an extremely severe form through the criminal and felonious injections of antibiotics into the food by profit-greedy elements of all kinds. And actually, injections of antibiotics not only arrive into mammals and fish as well as into fowl, but also into birds and plants as well as into vegetables and fruits. In fact, it is also true that more and more antibiotics also arrive into a variety of creatures of all kinds that are in the ground and in the insect world. But that still is not enough, because in addition to the antibiotics, the earth humans produce various poisons of all kinds, as well as detergents, soaps, shampoos, herbicides, insecticides, and fertilizers, along with radioactive radiations and agents of all kinds that cause tremendous damage and that destroy the health of humans and animals as well as of fish, plants, insects, and worms. But this is also true in regards to birds.
If I may address you again on what you once said in reference to tomatoes. These contain active substances which prevent certain types of cancer?
That is of correctness. Tomatoes actually contain certain active substances that can prevent certain types of cancer to a large percentage, and indeed particularly prostate cancer. However, it is important that always enough tomatoes or tomato products are used for food, and especially in a cooked state, because through the cooking process, the active substances are strengthened. But in a positive, preventive form, other types of cancer are also able to be influenced by the tomato's active substances, as this is also the case with other types of vegetables as well as with fruits and all sorts of herbs and other plants. But about this, in accordance with our directives, I may not give any explanations in an official form, for this would offend against the self-development in terms of the research and insight collection of the Earth humans.
Always these directives. But I understand that our earthly humanity must strive in relation to its own development, and, thus, also with respect to all insights and achievements, and must acquire its own progress. It is like in school, where no one of a very low class can simply be moved up to a much higher one and be of the acceptance that he could understand the new and higher one if he has not yet learned all the material between the lower and higher class or grade. A progress must always take place in a consistent and systematic manner, such that everything to be learned is actually learned and nothing is omitted from it, as this is also the case, for another example, with the learning of an occupation. If the learning and the progress as well as the development do not occur in this manner, then there arise enormous knowledge gaps as well as a lack of practical knowledge, skill, and experience. But this means that the higher knowledge, etc., cannot be understood and cannot be processed, which leads to the fact that the higher knowledge or higher achievements are incorrectly applied, which usually leads to dangerous grievances and even to a catastrophe. The following serves as an example. If a primitive person living in the wild comes into a technological civilization and gets a submachine gun pressed into their hand, they will neither be able to use this consciously nor responsibly. Rather, they will simply wildly blast around with it if they do not already throw the gun away from themselves in fright, run away screaming, or succumb to insanity when the shooting iron goes bang. They simply cannot understand and cannot consciously process the whole thing, because they lack the necessary knowledge and other prerequisites that would enable them to understand it. Thus, it would amount to a paradox if you would break your directives and take hold of the Earth humans under their arms in a progress-related manner.
You explain these issues very precisely. You are really very talented in terms of giving explanations in such a form that they are also well understood. Moreover, I have already very often assessed that you muster up an infinite patience in order to explain something over and over again if someone does not understand a matter and cannot comprehend it. To this, I must confess that for my part, I'm not able to muster this patience, as I also miss the diversity of your language and possibilities of explanation, through which you are able to explain facts and concerns, etc., so that in the end there is no longer any doubt.
You are too kind with your compliments, my son. Unfortunately, despite my explanation efforts, misunderstandings arise again and again.
But that does not happen because of a fault on your part, as I have already very often determined, but because of the fact that complicated and incomplete questions are asked, and your answers and explanations are not analyzed further. Those are the factors that then lead to misunderstandings. In addition, as I have also very often determined, questions are directed towards you, whereby you cannot intelligibly answer the questioners, even with the best intention, because they are still lacking the necessary understanding and cognition possibilities, and therefore, everything is foreign to them. But this very fact is a peculiarity of the Earth human, namely, that they always want to know more than what they can actually understand and bear. This then also leads to the fact that they ask unclear questions, which they often do not even understand, or cannot formulate properly, from which then even misunderstandings arise and so on.
With that, you may be quite right. Furthermore, it is also such that I simply may not answer questions in full, because it is not the right moment or the necessary understanding to do so is not given. So, for example, today or tomorrow, I can only answer a question partially, and can first give a full answer 3 or 7 years later when, in the meantime, the understanding and cognition for this have progressed so far with the questioner that everything becomes clearly received and understood.
That is the normal development of learning, recognizing, and understanding.
A fact that, unfortunately, is not understood by many. Many think that they are always smarter and cleverer than they are in reality, whereby they are of the wrong opinion that they would understand more than what is actually the case. And if one does not then deal with their questions in the framework desired by them, then they become endlessly offended, and they insult such a one as haughty, autocratic, presumptuous, conceited, arrogant, and as fraught with brain flatulence. I just recently experienced this again, when such a sect twerp, along with his sect aunt, insulted me in my office. When I gave them an explanation regarding the term sacrifice, which they did indeed ask me for.
Your answer and explanation would also interest me.
I will try if I can still recall it. I cannot repeat the explanation word for word, of course, but basically, I said the following. A sacrifice or a sacrificial offering is a pure exchange between a person and an alleged, or rather an imaginary divinity or false god. So, for example, a sacrifice is offered as a pure testimony of the faithfulness, the humility, and the gratitude towards the god or false god, for which this grants a good and long life. Good success, health, prosperity, freedom, revenge against enemies, victory in war and over enemies, as well as wealth, deliverance from poverty and misery, and countless other things. But this means that the offering or sacrificing to a god or false god represents a real business between this and the person or petitioner presenting the offering, freely according to the principle, here's the money, there's the goods. And when a person sacrifices other things, such as his or her modest contribution in the collection for a religion or sect, for the needy, or for a new church, a chapel, or for some other idolatrous temple, then this also corresponds to a business, for the business rule is this. There's a sacrifice, sacrificial offering, or offering for the calming of a bad conscience because a person has more than the poor. There's a sacrifice for the calming of anxiety, a sacrifice because one imagines himself or herself to be better than the next person, a sacrifice to gain advantages, and a sacrifice so that the enemy is massacred, so that a dispute or war is won and the winner is lifted into the sky, so that the hated neighbor gets the plague around his or her neck, or so that one wins the lottery. Thus, sacrifices are, in every case, always aligned toward profit, and to be sure, even when they are given from person to person. But it must be clearly stated that sincere assistance and sincere gifts of love for fellow human beings cannot be equated with sacrifices, because these demand nothing in return, in contrast to sacrifices. Sacrifices are, in every case, always religiously conditioned, cult-conditioned and, thus, faith-conditioned, associated with a dogma, with a doctrine, with which the theoretical side of the religion, the sect, or the other cult is represented. This theory of a cultic, religious, or sectarian form represents a set of views, suppositions, and conceptions that are designed to represent the origin of all existence and, thus, of humans as well as of a highest, absolutely perfect, infallible, omnipotent, and omniscient as well as all-merciful power, which is designated in short simply as God. If one gets to the bottom of the matter, then one encounters the myth in which the faith is expressed, and what cultic customs, habits, and rituals are included, which have their own apparent logic as well as their schematic and mode of expression, depending on the nature of the cult. In addition, every religion or sect is based on a cult that gradually develops in a similar fashion to the dogma or the doctrine, from which, in turn, a religious or sectarian drive results, which appears as a reverence for the divinity and its holiness, along with rituals and other cult actions. Also included in this is the religious humble prayer to the divinity or the false god, as well as the sacrifice for all possible and impossible purposes, and often a pilgrimage is still connected with it. And with the sacrifice, the business and the exchange come to language again, namely in the sense that if you, as a human being, want something from your god or false god, then first of all, you must give him something for it, even a sacrifice or a promise, which does, indeed, come out to about the same, and afterwards, you must offer him something again as a thank you. As a rule, so this has been here since time immemorial, since the nonsense of the sacrificial offering has existed, something very precious is sacrificed to the divinity or false god, such as in earlier times rare forest fruits and field crops and such, and later even animal blood. However, the peak of the murderous offering was reached with the fact that human sacrifices were often the first and last tributes, which were allegedly demanded by the divinities or false gods. In particular, these were children and virgins who lost their lives in the sacrifices. Thus, cult sites and altars became sacrificial sites or murder sites, where innocent human blood was often immediately spilled in great quantities, and all this just to satisfy the bloodlust of the crazy priests, magicians, and shaman, as well as the medicine men and false prophets and messengers of God, etc., who mendaciously maintained that their divinities or false gods demanded human blood sacrifices in order to ensure peace, freedom, rain, or prosperity, etc., or to turn away disaster, or to make atonement for something. That, my friend, corresponds to the answer and the explanations that I gave to the two sectarians.
You astonish me. How precisely you have explained everything.
Thanks, but consider that it is my task to fulfill my mission, and this requires that I always strive to explain all things clearly and plainly. But now to something else. For quite some time, one has heard again and again that criminals want to seize or take possession of materials, with which small atom bombs are supposed to be built in order to threaten, to carry out extortions, to pursue terrorism, or simply to spread fear and terror. Does one really have to take all this seriously? And is it even possible that non-scientists can build such bombs?
The necessary knowledge to achieve this is very well needed. But nowadays, this requires no great effort because everything is held in writing in textbooks as training courses, whereby these are freely accessible to all Earth humans or can easily be acquired. Therefore, someone who is knowledgeable in the relevant subject can easily build such small atom bombs if they can obtain the materials needed for this. Nevertheless, concerning such bombs, also the great power countries are interested in developing and manufacturing these, as this is the case with America and the Soviet Union that will soon no longer exist, which will be converted into a Russian Federation, in which case Russia, along with France, China, Israel, Pakistan, India, and several other nations, will also strive for such small atom bombs. Secretly, the Iraqi dictator will also take part in this, along with other power-hungry ones. In particular, America will make special efforts after the turn of the millennium in order to be able to implement such bombs when the megalomaniacal and extremely unscrupulous, irresponsible, and world domination-addicted president of the USA lives out his global terror.
Those are not exactly pleasant prospects.
that is of correctness.
The guy Bush, as he will be called, as you have well said, is obviously a complete maniac. Perhaps he is also the fellow who will then press the red button in order to trigger World War III, through which the great catastrophe would then be perfect.
This possibility will be given then, unfortunately, because in his addiction for world domination and warmongering, he will know no bounds and will, at least, threaten many nations with war and revenge, etc., which could then very well lead to a global war, as the Enoch prophecies describe this. If the American population then does not bring the shouting for death, vengeance, and destruction to reason, and the population of the entire world as well as the governments of the earthly nations do not recollect themselves and do not undertake anything against all that will be breaking out and against the still threatening insanity, so that everything can be put to an end and the madness of the ones in charge can be stopped, and through this, everything be turned to the better, then a lot of evil, harm, destruction, and annihilation is coming in the new millennium. However, there will not just be the criminal and inhumane, irresponsible machinations of the President of America, who has actually been life-despising since time immemorial, because the criminal in charge of Israel will also act likewise, who at that time will bring much death, pain, sorrow, destruction, and downfall over Israel and Palestine and all the human beings there. With this, I am referring to the two men, Bush and Sharon, who will order and steer the murderous events in the coming time, and this under the approval of many senseless ones and advocates of the tremendous crimes that are then committed. In addition, crimes of terror will be committed to an enormous extent by fanatics of the Palestinians, whereby their suicidal acts of terror will take on incredibly primitive and inhuman forms, and many deaths will have to be lamented. Everything on both sides, so on the Israeli as well as on the Palestinian side, will degenerate to such a degree that prisoners will be made, and then they will simply be shot and thus murdered, and many will even be tortured beforehand. Everything will cruelly escalate and aus arten get very badly out of control of the good human nature. In addition, there are also other national powerful figures of various other countries, such as the national leaders of Iraq and Iran, who will act in the same form. This in addition to the degenerated religious, sectarian, and fundamentalist fanatics, through whom more global and very dangerous and human life-demanding terror will be exercised. Martial terror with thousands of murders and rapes, etc., will also break out across the Balkans, along with atrocities that are committed in a religious and fanatical manner in Ireland, and that still will not come to an end for a long time. Yet also Korea will not find any peace so quickly, as well as not Africa and South America, where tremendous human massacres and degenerate acts of war, as well as abductions and murders, as well as expulsions of people from their land and even from their homeland, will take place. Even Sri Lanka, Kashmir, and India, as well as Afghanistan and other countries, will not remain spared from all these terrible events. Innumerable things of the coming times could still be enumerated, but what has been said so far should be enough. But despite all the bad signs, the Earth human should never and may never give up hope, as well as not their efforts, but should still let reason prevail.
Now, enough should actually be spoken of that, at least for the time being. In addition, I still have another important question that I would like to ask, if you still have time to answer this. For this question, your medical knowledge would be required.
After that, it should be enough for today, however.
Of course, so it should be. So then, for a few years there has been more and more talk of acupuncture, a healing method, with which fine needles are stuck in the body in certain places. This method of acupuncture, which is being discussed more and more, should really bring good healing results and should come from China, and, of course, should have also been invented by the Chinese. The piercing of the needles into the body should be absolutely painless. But scientifically, this healing method of acupuncture is not yet investigated and proven to be right and good. At least not in the Western world, where the whole thing bumps into at least some skepticism, particularly in the medical school. Do you know something about this? And if so, what do you, as a doctor, have to say and explain to this?
Acupuncture causes the healing of physical and psychological, as well as consciousness-related sufferings and illnesses through the setting of special, fine needles at specific concentration points of one's life energy, which pulse through the body on certain paths. The set needles influence the entire energetic system of the person, but this is also true for animals, fish, insects, and birds, as well as for plants, when these are treated with acupuncture. The healing effect, as I already mentioned, occurs in the body, as well as in the consciousness and the psyche, depending on how and where the acupuncture needles are set. But the true origin of acupuncture does not trace back to traditional Chinese medicine, as is, unfortunately, erroneously maintained. Rather, it was received by the latter only from old traditions and was integrated into the old Chinese medicine and brought to application. The actual origin was already established millions of years ago and thus traces very far back into the past, and to be sure, into Enoch's time. Enoch himself was the investigator and inventor of acupuncture, which was taken over and exercised by his peoples, and which has endured to the present day among the distant descendants of the peoples from the other side of the sun, which is how it has been received by today's Chinese. But despite its great remedial effectiveness, acupuncture is just one of many other methods and options of treatment for the entire field of medicine. But in principle, acupuncture is very much more than just medicine, because its ultimate goal is not just the healing of illnesses and sufferings or of any trivial discomforts of any kind, etc., but primarily to make the entire body, as well as the consciousness and the psyche, healthy, and, basically, to allow no sufferings, discomforts, or illnesses to arise at all. But this means that one's life energy can flow and work properly in the body. The cosmic electromagnetic life energy is the creation-given energy and is, in fact, also the actual existing energy of creation, which is also called energy, and which is also given in all life forms, as well as in every spirit form of a conscious or instinct-conscious form. This life energy, which we refer to in our language by the specific designation of Qing, is a constant flux from the universe that, through the energy lines, that is to say, energy channels, which we designate as sananta, and thus conductive channels, flows through the body of each life form, so also in humans. The Chinese designations for these forms represent their own formulations from the Chinese language and, therefore, have nothing in common with our ancient traditional terms that still trace back to Enoch's language. The life energy of an electromagnetic and cosmic nature, which we also call active energy, flows similarly to flowing waters, but through a form of certain energy channels, through the entire body of every single life form, and indeed, no matter what genus and species. These energy channels, that is to say sananta or conductive channels, pervade the entire body of every life form. So humans as well as animals, fish, insects, birds and plants, and even microbes, bacilli and viruses, which means that actually every life form possesses them. This energy flow, the all-animating cosmic electromagnetic life energy, creates the difference between the effective living and the non-living, so between what is moving and what is non-moving. But in the case of the non-moving, there can be no talk of dying out or of totem, as the Earth person erroneously designates this, for even the non-living, that is to say what is non-moving, is existent, as for example rock, stone, sand, and metal, etc. These things that are also life forms and that we designate as passive life forms, in contrast to active life forms, do not exist through the same form of cosmic electromagnetic life energy through which all moving life is begotten, born, and animated, and also passes again, in order to change itself into other forms. These passive life forms actually exist through a passive energy, which must logically be designated as passive cosmic electromagnetic energy. The cosmic electromagnetic life energy is constructed in the same forces of positive and negative, as this is uniformly the case in all creational creations of every kind. And exactly this means that neither on Earth nor on any other worlds or stars or anywhere else in the universe could or can something arise or exist that does not hold both forces of positive and negative in itself, or which is not animated by the active energy or passive energy. Without the opposite forces of positive and negative, which complement each other, always being given simultaneously, nothing can become existent and nothing can exist. But this means that even with the passive energy, both forces are present, so both positive as well as negative. At the same time, the negative represents the passive, the feminine, receptive, dormant, and old, while the positive represents the active, light, and warmth, as well as the masculine, generative, and the new, as this has been defined since ages ago. That is how the cosmic electromagnetic life energy is to be seen. Therefore, divided into two factors, into two forces, respectively positive and negative energies, which form a unit in themselves as well as in their union. Now, if these energies get out of balance, then there results either an energy shortage, an energy surplus, or an energy obstruction, that is to say, an energy blockade. And as already mentioned, and it must be said again, both forms of energy always only exist together and are inseparably linked with one another. So the feminine and the masculine, and thus the positives and negatives, are always simultaneously present, and indeed in every movable as well as immovable life form. So also must the human himself or herself be. By this I mean that they must move from the left to the right, that is, from a strength or even from one energy form to another, without becoming sick, stricken, or burdened with troubles thereby. But if they fall prey to a weakness of a physical, psychological, or consciousness-related form, then an imbalance between the positive and negative energies is produced. If this is the case, then it does not require an enormous expenditure of energy to succumb to any discomforts. Sorrows, illnesses, aggressions, emotions, depressions, moral depths, as well as mental, psychological, or consciousness-related misreactions. Such occurs when an energy defect exists. The cosmic electromagnetic life energy flows in a person in certain channels that are given for this, which we, as already explained, refer to as sananta. On the sanantas are the acupuncture centers or acupuncture points, through which the cosmic electromagnetic life energy arrives at the body's surface, but the acupuncture nodes have nothing to do with the so-called chakras, which only correspond to an illusory form. And precisely where the acupuncture centers are, of which, overall, 7 to 86 exist, but in the Chinese acupuncture teachings, as far as I know, only 672 of these are known. The life energy penetrates at the body's surface, where it can be influenced by the acupuncture needling. The life energetic and, thus, vitally necessary Sananta system shows a certain resemblance to the circulatory system, because just as the blood pulses through the veins, so does the cosmic electromagnetic life energy pulse through the energy system. Each Sananta is also associated with a particular organ of the body, whereby all of the cycles are closely interconnected and mutually influence one another. With the entire Sananta system, however, it can lead to an energy obstruction, namely when the energy is blocked, and precisely this means, then, that the immune system of the body, the consciousness, and/or the psyche, is disturbed and weakened and suffers damage, through which physical, consciousness-related or psychological troubles, sufferings, or illnesses appear. And along with this, what is not yet known to the earthly scientists and physicians is the fact that not only the body and its organs, but also the consciousness and the psyche have a particular immune system assigned to them. Now, if an energy obstruction of the life energy arises somewhere in the Sananta system, then the obstruction can be dissolved by a purpose-driven acupuncture. But it is to be noted that different forms of acupuncture are necessary for different troubles, sufferings, and illnesses. Now, in order to come to speak on acupuncture needles as well as on their application, it is to be said that the fine needles used for the needling are only about 0.5 millimeter thick and are inserted into the body using different depths. Therefore, the insertion depth can vary from a few millimeters up to 5 centimeters, whereby the depth is determined by the acupuncture point. The needle is stuck directly into the acupuncture center of the Sananta. This triggers a provocation, by what means the body produces nerve growth hormones that quickly spread into the surrounding tissue, thereby calming down inflammations at the nerve ends and healing these completely. Furthermore, these growth hormones move over the nerve up to the nerve's root, where they trigger and carry out a regeneration of the nervous fibers. The effect of acupuncture can still be enhanced, namely by the acupuncture center being stimulated by the manual movements of the needles that are stuck in the body, in which the needles remain up to 30 minutes. Even with the manual movements of the needles, no pain arises for the person being treated. And what is still to be said, still today, unfortunately, the earthly medical school views the human being in parts or sections, and exactly this is wrong, because the human being must be viewed medically as a whole. Social, consciousness-related, psychological, intellectual, sentimental, and emotional constitutions of the human being are also of utmost importance. Therefore, not just the conventional medical thinking and the related aspects, diagnoses, and resulting medication may be considered. Moreover, if one wants to describe the momentary state of life energy of a human being, then one can refer to the 5 natural elements: wood, water, fire, earth, and metal. Processes are symbolized by these elements, as these appear in nature and as these also operate in humans. The functions of the organs, as well as the worlds of thoughts, feelings, psyches, emotions, and consciousnesses, are also allotted to these elements. And as is determined by nature, all elements mutually influence each other. In addition to true acupuncture, what must also be mentioned is that there is an additional way to stimulate an acupuncture center more strongly, namely the so-called moxibustion, through which an increase in energy can be produced. For this, a small ball of dried moxa is attached to the free end of the acupuncture needle and is ignited. Through this, the needle that is stuck in the body warms up, which then leads the heat into the depth of the tissue. This results in increased blood circulation, which in turn accelerates the healing process. Of course, it is never necessary to have only one acupuncture treatment. but several, but usually after the first treatment, or after 2 or 3, there is a noticeable improvement in the suffering, the illness, or other complaints. At the same time, it is important to know that with any form of acupuncture, if such is correctly brought to application, side effects never appear, as they very often do with chemical or herbal medicines.
Dear, thanks for your detailed explanation, which has brought me insightful knowledge. This will surely also help many people who are interested in acupuncture, but who do not have the faintest idea of it, and therefore might worry that this remedial method is painful and could have some bad side effects.
But now it is time for me to go, my friend. Farewell and see you again soon.
Take care, and again, many thanks. See you again soon.